January 1988, downtown Los Angeles, a federal courtroom on Spring Street. Michael Harris sits at the defense table wearing a tailored suit worth more than most jurors make in a month. 3 weeks ago, he was moving between legitimate theater circles and people who worked in them. 2 weeks ago, he was moving multi-kilo shipments from Colombia to Detroit. Today, he is listening to a former associate describe how they dragged a man into the Mojave Desert and left him for dead. The problem is, the man survived. James Lester crawled out of that desert with a bullet wound and a story that would cost Harris everything. Prosecutors later described the operation as generating millions of dollars in revenue at its peak. He had legitimate theater credits, celebrity connections, and a cocaine distribution network spanning 8 states. Now he is watching his empire collapse because one victim refused to die. Here is how it went down. South Central, Los Angeles, late 1950s. The neighborhood where Michael Harris entered the world was not the war zone it would become. Working class families, church on Sundays, fathers who came home from factory jobs. But by the time Harris reached adolescence in the late 1960s, the landscape was shifting. Manufacturing jobs were leaving. Heroin was arriving. The Black Panthers were organizing. The streets were becoming something else entirely. Harris was different from the corner boys. He watched, he listened, he took notes. While other teenagers were running with gangs, Harris was reading business magazines in the library. He enrolled at Los Angeles Southwest College, studied accounting, marketing, the mechanics of how money moves through legitimate systems. Most dealers learn the game from the streets. Harris learned it from textbooks first. The disconnect between his education and his environment created something dangerous. It was a mind trained for corporate strategy, operating in an underground economy. He saw what the hustlers around him could not. The drug trade was not a hustle. It was a market. Supply chains, distribution networks, customer retention, brand consistency. The same principles that built General Motors could build something else entirely. By the early 1970s, Harris had made his first moves. Small weight, testing suppliers, building trust. But he was not trying to become a street legend. He was trying to become invisible. The loudest dealers were always the first to fall. Harris understood that real power does not announce itself. Real power moves quietly, builds infrastructure, creates systems that operate whether you are present or not. His brother David became his first true partner. David handled operations. Michael handled strategy. The division was clean from the start. One brother in the field, one brother above the field. They were not running a crew, they were building a corporation. The cocaine boom of the late 1970s changed everything. Powder was flooding into Los Angeles from Colombia, and most dealers were selling it the old way. Corner transactions, single buyers, cash and carry. Harris saw inefficiency everywhere he looked. Too many hands touching product. Too many conversations that could be overheard. Too many opportunities for theft, violence, and exposure. His innovation was architectural. He built what became known as the Rock House model. Instead of dealers on corners, Harris established fixed locations, houses in residential neighborhoods that operated like retail franchises. Customers knew the address, they knew the hours, they knew the product would be consistent. No negotiation, no street theater, walk in, pay, walk out. Each house ran on a schedule, morning shift, afternoon shift, night shift. Workers rotated to prevent burnout and reduce the chance of anyone knowing too much. The product was prepackaged in standardized quantities. No weighing at the point of sale, no disputes about short counts. Assembly line narcotics. By 1980, Harris had rock houses running across South Central, but he was already thinking bigger. Los Angeles was saturated with too many competitors and too much law enforcement attention. The real money was in territories where cocaine had not yet conquered. Places hungry for product but lacking reliable supply. Detroit became his proving ground. The Motor City was hemorrhaging jobs, factories closing, neighborhoods collapsing, and into that void, Harris sent product and personnel. He did not just ship cocaine to Detroit. He exported his entire business model. Rock houses opened in abandoned storefronts. Local workers were trained in his methods. Quality control was maintained through regular shipments of prepackaged product. The logistics alone were staggering. Cocaine arrived from Colombia through multiple entry points, with Los Angeles serving as central processing. Product was repackaged, branded, and shipped east via vehicles with custom hidden compartments. Cash flowed back through similar channels. Bulk currency was counted, bundled, and laundered through a network of legitimate businesses. Harris acquired car washes, laundromats, and small restaurants. Each one was a washing machine for dirty money. The businesses barely needed to turn a profit. Their purpose was transformation. Drug dollars in, clean dollars out, tax returns filed, receipts generated, the appearance of legitimate commerce. By 1983, the operation had expanded beyond Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, St. Louis. 8 states were receiving regular shipments. Harris was not a drug dealer anymore. He was running a distribution network with the complexity of a Fortune 500 supply chain. Pagers replaced phone calls. Early mobile communications allowed coordination across state lines. A fleet of vehicles moved constantly, product going out, cash coming back. The numbers were staggering. Prosecutors later described the operation as generating millions of dollars in revenue at its peak. Not per month, per day. That is not a corner operation. That is not even a city operation. That is national infrastructure. But money at that scale creates its own problems. You can only wash so much through car washes. You can only hide so much in walls and safe deposit boxes. The cash was piling up faster than it could be cleaned. Harris needed something bigger, something that could absorb millions without raising questions. Entertainment. The legitimate side of Michael Harris began not as a cover story, but as genuine ambition. He wanted what the drug money could never actually buy: respect, legacy, a name that meant something beyond the streets. He started attending theater productions, gallery openings, industry events where money opened doors regardless of its origin. Broadway became his obsession. The glamour, the prestige, the cultural legitimacy. Here was an industry that consumed capital voraciously. Productions cost millions. Investors came and went. Large cash infusions were not unusual. They were expected. In the late 1980s, he began investing in legitimate theater productions, and he moved in circles with well-known actors. But the streets do not pause while you chase respectability. The same week Harris was pursuing his theatrical ambitions, he was dealing with a very different kind of drama. James Lester, a member of his organization, had become a problem. Money was missing, trust was broken, and in the Harris operation, broken trust had consequences. The decision to handle Lester personally was Harris's first major mistake. For years, he had maintained distance between himself and violence. Others handled enforcement. Harris handled strategy. But Lester's betrayal felt personal. The amount was significant. The disrespect was intolerable. Harris wanted to send a message himself. 1987. Lester was taken, driven out to the Mojave Desert, interrogated about the missing money, then shot and left for dead. A clean ending to a messy problem. Except Lester did not die. Somewhere in that desert, bleeding from a gunshot wound, Lester found the will to move. He crawled, he walked, he reached a road, he flagged down a vehicle. He survived. And when law enforcement found him, he talked. Not immediately, not completely at first, but enough. Names, dates, locations. The organizational structure Harris had spent a decade building, described in detail by a man who was supposed to be dead. He was later indicted and convicted on violent and drug-related charges and received a multi-decade sentence. Harris's attorneys fought, motions filed, witnesses challenged, but the evidence was overwhelming. Lester's testimony, corroborating witnesses, financial records that documented the money laundering operation. The irony was savage. An empire worth billions, brought down by a single body that refused to stay in the desert. Harris entered the California prison system as a man who had lost everything. The rock houses were shuttered. Legitimate businesses were seized. Broadway dreams were finished. At 40 years old, He was facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. Most men would have accepted defeat, focused on appeals, counted days, but Harris was still thinking like a CEO. Even in prison, he saw opportunity. The late 1980s and early 1990s were a pivotal moment in hip-hop. The music was transitioning from party anthems to something harder. West Coast artists were developing a sound that would come to dominate the decade, and the industry infrastructure to support that sound was still being built. Harris heard about it through the prison network, conversations with other inmates, letters from associates still connected to the outside. There was a lawyer named David Kenner who handled cases for some serious players, and there was a bodyguard named Marion Knight. People called him Suge. Suge Knight had ambition but lacked capital. He had muscle but needed money. He was trying to build a record label that could compete with the established powers. What he needed was an investor. Someone who could provide the seed money to get started. Someone who understood how to build an organization from nothing. Harris had hidden money. Assets the feds never found. Cash that had been moved before the indictment. Enough to fund something significant. And from his cell, he began to plan. The introduction happened through Kenner. The lawyer saw an opportunity to connect two clients who needed each other. Harris needed a vehicle for his hidden money. Knight needed capital to launch Death Row Records. The marriage was arranged. Claims later surfaced that an outside investor supplied early capital to help launch Death Row Records. The money flowed through intermediaries. Kenner handled the paperwork. On paper, Harris was invisible, but in reality, he was the financial foundation upon which the entire enterprise was built. The structure was supposed to be simple. Harris would be a scent partner through his company, Godfather Entertainment. Death Row would build the label and generate revenue. Eventually, Harris would emerge from prison to claim his legitimate share of a legitimate business. The drug money would be transformed into entertainment money. The kingpin would become a mogul. Death Row exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Dr. Dre's The Chronic dropped in December 1992. The album did not just succeed, it redefined West Coast hip-hop. It sold multiple platinum records and achieved cultural dominance. It created a sound that would influence music for the next decade. Then came Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style in November 1993. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, the first debut album ever to do so. It earned even more platinum certifications and even greater cultural impact. Death Row was no longer just a record label, it had become a phenomenon. Harris watched from his prison cell. He read every magazine article, watched every awards show, and followed every headline about the label he had funded. Both albums generated tens of millions of dollars and launched a highly lucrative business for the label. But something was wrong. The payments Harris expected never arrived. The partnership that had been promised was never formalized. Suge Knight appeared on television. Dr. Dre was on magazine covers. David Kenner was collecting legal fees. And Michael Harris, the man who had provided the foundation, was invisible. Letters went unanswered. Messages were not returned. The lawyer who had brokered the deal was now representing only Knight's interests. The silent partner was becoming the forgotten partner. Harris later alleged the money he funneled to the label was never acknowledged as an investment. The partnership structure that was supposed to protect his interests had never been properly executed. From his prison cell, he had no leverage, no ability to enforce agreements, and no way to prevent Knight and Kenner from erasing his contribution to Death Row's founding. The betrayal was comprehensive. Harris had traded a drug empire for an entertainment empire, and he ended up with neither. The money he could not spend in prison had built something massive, and that thing belonged to other people. He had been played by the same lawyer who was supposed to protect him. 1996 brought more success for Death Row. Tupac Shakur signed to the label. All Eyes on Me became one of the best-selling hip-hop albums in history. Then Tupac was killed in Las Vegas. The violence that had always surrounded Death Row claimed his biggest star. The label began its collapse. Internal conflicts, legal problems, financial mismanagement, Suge Knight's aggressive tactics created enemies everywhere. Artists fled. Lawsuits multiplied. The enterprise that had been worth hundreds of millions began hemorrhaging value. Harris watched this too, from his cell, through prison televisions, and through letters from associates who remained on the outside. The company he had funded was destroying itself, and he was still locked up, still fighting for recognition, still trying to prove that death row existed because of his money. The legal battles began in earnest. Harris filed suit claiming his stake in death row. The case dragged through courts for years. Depositions, document requests, motions and counter motions. Kenner denied everything. Knight denied everything. The founding story of death row became contested history. Harris had receipts, records of the money transfer, testimony from people who knew about the original arrangement, but proving a verbal partnership from inside prison against well-funded opponents was nearly impossible. The case became a war of attrition that Harris could not win from behind bars. Meanwhile, his sentence continued. Appeals denied, parole hearings unsuccessful. The California Department of Corrections had no interest in releasing a convicted drug kingpin early. The years stretched ahead like a highway with no exits. Harris adapted to prison life the way he had adapted to everything else, strategically. He became an advocate for other inmates, helped with legal filings, and organized educational programs. He transformed himself from drug dealer to jailhouse lawyer to prison reformer. If he was going to be inside, he was going to matter inside. The years accumulated. The 1990s gave way to the 2000s and then to the 2010s. Death Row Records went bankrupt. Suge Knight went to prison himself, convicted of voluntary manslaughter in 2018. Over the ensuing decades, many of the key players associated with the label either died or were imprisoned. But Harris was still there, still in a cell, still filing motions, still maintaining that he was owed recognition for what he had built and what had been stolen from him. The criminal justice reform movement that emerged in the 2010s brought new attention to cases like Harris's. Long sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, elderly inmates who no longer posed any threat, the cost to taxpayers of housing men for decades past any reasonable public safety justification. Harris became a cause. Criminal justice advocates took up his case. Former associates who had gone legitimate spoke on his behalf. Over time, figures in the music world spoke out about clemency and criminal justice issues related to the era and its prisoners. January 2021, the final days of Donald Trump's presidency. A list of pardons and commutations was being assembled. Names were submitted by lawyers, pushed by advocates, and recommended by celebrities with White House access. Michael Harris appeared on the list. Not a full pardon, but a commutation. His sentence would be reduced to time served. After 33 years in prison, he was going to walk out. The announcement came on January 19, 2021. One day before the new administration took office, Harris's name appeared alongside dozens of others. The drug kingpin who became a Broadway producer, who became a prison reformer, was finally getting out. The release was surreal. Harris had entered prison in his late 30s and emerged in his 70s. The Los Angeles he returned to was unrecognizable. Neighborhoods he had once controlled were gentrified or demolished. The rock house model he had pioneered had been replaced by other distribution methods. The cocaine trade had been overshadowed by methamphetamine, fentanyl, and opioids. But Death Row Records still existed, sort of. The brand had passed through multiple owners. The catalog remained valuable. The legacy endured in hip-hop history. In February 2022, Snoop Dogg acquired Death Row Records from its bankruptcy owners. The man who had built his career on the label Harris funded now owned the label itself. And Snoop did something no one expected. He acknowledged Harris and brought him into the fold. The founding partner who had been erased was finally being recognized. Harris emerged into a world that had moved on without him. 3 decades had passed. The Cold War ended. The internet was born, grew up, and transformed everything. The cell phones that had seemed revolutionary when he went in were now supercomputers in everyone's pocket. He had missed entire technological revolutions, cultural shifts, and generational changes. But he was free, walking streets he had not walked since the Reagan administration. breathing air that was not recirculated through prison ventilation, making decisions about what to eat, where to go, and who to see without asking permission from guards. The death row story had come full circle in the strangest possible way. Harris provided the seed money. Knight built the empire. Knight destroyed the empire. Knight went to prison. Snoop bought the wreckage. Snoop brought Harris back. 33 years, he was accused of moving very large quantities of cocaine across multiple states. He pioneered the rock house model that would be copied by every major drug organization. He produced a Broadway play starring Denzel Washington. He funded the label that launched Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and Tupac Shakur. He watched from a prison cell as others became billionaires using his investment. He outlasted Knight, outlasted Kenner, and outlasted the prosecutors, judges, and prison officials who thought he would die inside. That is how the game ends when it does not kill you.